Hi, my name is Connor Riley, and on this week's episode of Connor in Coverage, we won't be buying the wrong soccer team or blowing up any space shuttles. Instead, we're going to talk about Georgia football during spring practice. Hello, everyone, and welcome into another edition of Connor in Coverage. We do this every Sunday night, talking a little Georgia football. Bulldogs have completed 6 of their 15 practices for this spring so far. That is roughly 40% of what they've gone through. They're going to start scrimmaging next week, start to get a better lay of what this team looks like in 11 on 11. But 6 practices so far, a couple in pads. So learned some things so far about this team. Obviously, we're going to touch on all that tonight. Freshmen who are making an impact. Obviously, the quarterback battle continues to be ongoing there. I think that's obviously the most interesting thing and something that, quite frankly, we're not going to get a resolution on anytime soon. Talked some veterans this week. Got to hear from some pretty interesting players, guys who have clearly already proven themselves in terms of what they're going to be capable of doing. But for a guy like a Brock Bowers or a Shmal Munden, who are clearly very talented players, what do they sort of look to get out of spring practice, given, they're clearly already established guys and players that know what to do when the lights come on in the fall? And I thought we got some good answers out of them this week. But our first main topic here tonight on Connor in Coverage, we're going to be talking about the areas that so far really jump out as the strengths for this team. And talking to some players this week, talking to some people around the program, I think there's 2 areas where it's pretty obvious this is going to be the strength of the Georgia team. And it's the interior of the offensive line, and it's the inside linebacker room for Georgia. And the way I'm going to use, what these guys have said about this to illustrate it is in looking at some of the players who aren't necessarily pushing for starting playing time right now, but, speaks to the depth and the level of talent they have in that room, in those 2 respective rooms. We'll start on the offensive line with Tate Ratledge having some comments that he made this week. Tate Ratledge comes back. Cedric Van Pran comes back as your starting center. Xavier Truss is a starting left guard, comes back. You bring back the bulk of the interior from last year's championship-winning offensive line. And behind that, you've got guys that are talented and good enough to play. Austin Blasky is a guy where if Cedric Van Pran had elected to go on to the NFL, he would have been Georgia's starting center, I believe. Instead, he's battling it out at that left tackle position. And then 2 guys, we haven't heard much of, Dylan Fairchild and Micah Morris, are 2 guys that, Tate Ratledge vows are still doing the right things and making an impression and playing hard and getting better in practice. The problem is there's so much talent ahead of them that guys who were top 100 overall recruits in the 2021 recruiting cycle, guys that had multiple SEC offers, guys that would probably be starting at multiple SEC schools, can't beat out and can't get onto the field because of guys like Tate, because of guys like Xavier Truss, Cedric Van Pran in the middle of that offense right now. And it just sort of speaks to, I think, what this interior of the offensive line, which despite Georgia winning 2 back-to-back national titles, I don't think what you would classify as a strength. It certainly wasn't on that 2021 team. And I did think they made some improvements there in 2022. But this guard-center guard combo Georgia's set to have in 2023 is perhaps the strongest they've really ever had under Kirby Smart. And while, yes, you do have to figure out the tackle situation, when you have Amarius Mims, the aforementioned Austin Blasky, Ernest Green, they're going to have a lot of options there. And it speaks to the fact that what Tate Ratledge says here about Micah Morris and Dylan Fairchild, 2 really talented players, these guys are sort of afterthoughts on this offensive line, specifically in the interior, I think speaks to why this offensive line is set to be one of the best, if not the best, in college football this year.
Micah Morris, Dylan Fairchild are both really impressive right now. Jared Wilson, he's an athlete. He's physical. He's smart. And there's a lot. Monroe came in. He's athletic. And he just shows how athletic he is. Of course, he's got things to learn here and there just about college ball, but a lot of people have came in and started doing really well.
So you hear Tate talking right there, Micah Morris, Dylan Fairchild, Jared Wilson, Monroe Freeling. None of those guys are really expected to play a significant role for Georgia in 2023, and that's because you bring back a guy like Tate, who I'll be interested in seeing as he's gotten healthier and healthier over his college career, coming back from that foot injury that ended his 2021 season. Can he develop into an all-SEC offensive lineman? I think you can see that at that guard position. Cedric Van Pran, the expectation is not just to be the best center in the SEC, but even the best center in all of college football. I think that's certainly within the realm of possibility with Van Pran. Xavier Truss at left guard is a very capable player who's played in a lot of big time football games for Georgia throughout his career to this point. And so you bring back a lot of talent there. That interior of the offensive line is going to make life much, much easier for whoever ends up being that starting quarterback. You look throughout the history of football. If you're getting pressured constantly up the middle, it doesn't matter if you're Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes. If you're getting whipped up front, it's hard to be a really good quarterback. So whoever steps in, Carson Beck, Brock Vandergriff, Gunnar Stockton, they're going to be protected, especially in the middle right there. And that's going to make their lives so much easier for what this offense is going to potentially look like in 2023. On the defensive side of the ball, it's that inside linebacker position. And it starts with the fact that Georgia, you bring back Shmuel Munden, who led the team in tackles last year. You bring back Jamon Dumas-Johnson, who was second in tackles last season. There's so much depth at that inside linebacker position. There are a couple different ways you can explain it. Tresman Marshall leaves to go to Alabama, of all places, to find more playing time. Jalen Walker is a guy who, if he's going to get on the field, like I think he will in 2023, it's going to be at the outside linebacker position there. You bring back Ryan Davis. You have a guy in Xavier Sori who was a five-star recruit like Shmuel Munden was in the 2021 recruiting cycle, and sort of like we just mentioned with Michael Morris and Dylan Fairchild, sort of an afterthought at the position right now. And it speaks to where this inside linebacker room is. And you look at some of the best teams in Georgia football history under Kirby Smart. 2017, they had Roquan Smith. 2021, you have Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, Channing Tindall. Obviously last year, a little bit of an outlier there, but you look at the strengths from both the interior of the offensive line and the inside linebacker room, and offensive line maybe more broadly speaking. When those are the strengths of this Georgia football program, good things have tended to happen. It was the case last year when they won the national title with the offensive line being a strength. 2021, it was that inside linebacker room. Now in this year, those are probably your top two areas where you have the greatest depth and talent. I think maybe the defensive line can get there. I just have to know if Michael Williams is going to be the disruptive presence that we saw Jalen Carter be a year ago. Does he make that leap forward to prove that he can be an every down disruptor there, like Jalen Carter was, especially during the second half of the season for Georgia? And so, the top two guys at this inside linebacker room come back, and it'll be interesting in seeing how those guys progress and get better. Obviously, Jamon is a guy who's going to get a lot of All-American pub, but I thought with how Shmuel finished last season, he was actually better than Jamon Dumas-Johnson. And so hearing Shmuel talk this week about the back and forth that he and the dynamic that he and Jamon Dumas-Johnson have together, what that ultimately means for this 2023 defense, I don't want to say right now it's going to be as good as that 2021 one was, but on paper, there's a lot of talent on this defense, and it starts with that inside linebacker room with the dynamics that Shmuel Munden and Jamon Dumas-Johnson bring to this defense in 2023.
I still feel like we got a lot left to show. We got a lot of room to grow still. We're not really complacent and stuck on last year. We know we still got a lot of room for improvement. So really just working on things like that.
Is there a competition for I wonder, you're the leading returning tackle. You led the team in tackles last year. Do you guys, is there a competition? I know some of it's just where they go because everybody kind of plays their assignment, or is there a little competition for those type of things?
Nah, really it's just like really everybody just trying to go out there and just make plays for the team, not necessarily making plays for themselves or for their own stats. So I didn't even know I had the leading tackle till I think my dad told me sometime later on in the season. So me personally, I don't really keep up with all that, and I don't think a lot of those guys do either.
So, you hear Shmuel there talk about how he's not all that focused in stats, and there are areas where he and Jamon can continue to get better. I think that should give you a lot of encouragement for what you're going to see in this defense in 2023. It's not the most difficult of schedules there, but there were some causes for concern at the end of the 2023 season, the game against LSU, the game against Ohio State. Look, in the second half of that game against Ohio State, Georgia essentially realized, look, we're not getting pressure consistently with our four. We're going to have to win with getting pressure with guys like Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Shmuel Munden. They both come up with sacks in that game and that win over Ohio State. And I'll be interested in seeing the steps forward they take. The Georgia pass rush took a step back this past season. I think part of that was because of the talent drain. I think they only had 35 sacks compared to 49 the year before. we'll see this season, because I do think the talent level on the defensive line and the defensive front in general is higher this year. And if that's the case, I think you should see the sack numbers rise once again into the 40s, maybe possibly even the 50s, depending on how aggressive Glenn Schumann wants to be in terms of calling this defense, specifically in terms of calling the front seven there. So, sort of wrapping things up with our first segment of the night, I think so far with spring practice, one of the things that has been made obvious, at least to me, are the biggest areas of strength for Georgia in 2023. It is the interior, the offensive line, it is that inside linebacker room for this defense. And yes, maybe that should have been obvious going into spring practice, but hearing some of the guys that are trying and fighting and clawing to try and get onto the field, given how we discuss them as recruits, how we view them coming into the program, I think speaks to where those two position groups are in relation to the rest of the team right now. And so, yes, there are areas that are going to need to get better. I think outside linebacker is one. Tight end is an area we're going to touch on here in a little bit. Beyond Brock Bowers, there are some questions there, and that's not all limited to the guys in the field. It's also some of the coaching changes that have happened this offseason. And so we'll sort of see how, obviously, Georgia shores up some of its weaknesses, but just how strong some of these strengths are for Georgia in 2023. Because if the inside linebackers are dominating, we know what that looks like at Georgia. You can just look back to the 2021 season, where I thought Nakobe Dean was one of the 5-6 best players in all of the sport that year, in addition to what Channing Tindall and Quay Walker gave you. And if this Georgia offensive line is opening up holes and keeping Carson Beck, Brock Vandagriff, or Gunnar Stockton, whoever the Georgia quarterback is, clean, I think that's going to make this offensive transition going from Stetson Bennett and Todd Monken to a new quarterback and Mike Bobo much, much more seamless. So that's our sort of first topic there tonight, talking about the most obvious strengths and what Georgia's going to do. Transitioning here, moving on to our second topic of the night. We spent a lot of time here talking about newcomers. We've written a lot about them. I'm hoping to get a story out on Smoke Bowie at some point and what it's looked like for him and his transition to Georgia. Freshmen, we're all going to touch on them here in a little bit. Some guys we've heard impressing so far in practice and what they've been able to do so far. But, there are guys on this team, guys like Brock Bowers, guys like Shmal Munden, talking about what spring looks like for them. Brock Bowers is the best tight end in college football. In my opinion, he's the best player in college football coming back next year. Shmal Munden is an All-American level player. Tate Ratledge is a guy who is a proven commodity when it comes to playing at an SEC level. And all these guys, for one reason or another, all of them, get a chance to really work on and continue to improve their spring games and what they look like in practice. And it's worth noting that all three of those guys, Bowers, Munden, and Ratledge, were all either limited in Ratledge's case or outright out last year with Bowers and Munden. And so we got a chance to talk to Brock this week, in addition to talking to Shmal and Tate, and sort of hearing some of the things on what they wanted to improve on, areas that they wanted to get better at. You hear Shmal talking about block shedding and getting steps quicker and athleticism and using that. You hear Brock Bowers here talking about the things that he wants to get better at, which should, as an opposing team, should be kind of scary given how good Brock Bowers already is, and the fact that he feels there are areas that he can improve on should be pretty terrifying to the teams that'll have to face this offense in 2023.
I mean, I've definitely changed a little bit just because I'm one of the older guys now, which is kind of shocking me because I feel like I haven't been here very long. But I'm just trying to maybe do a little bit more, take a little bit more of a leadership role, even though we'll see.
What have you?
So in addition to, being a leader, being a more vocal player for this team this coming season, you've also got him wanting to work on his run blocking. He's noticeably added strength to his build and becoming a more physical player for this Georgia team. And ultimately what that is going to look like, I think it'll be interesting because, as we mentioned sort of here last week, I don't think Georgia's going to run as many two tight end sets as they did a season ago and rely. And that was essentially their base personnel last season. 60% of the snaps for this Georgia team where it had at least two tight ends on the field. And I just don't see that being the case. One, because they're stronger at wide receiver this year. Two, they're not as deep at that tight end room. They only have 4 scholarship guys right now. Pierce Sperlin is out for the rest of the spring with a shoulder injury. And then you have Lawson Lucky and Oscar Delp. And so they're not as deep at that tight end position this year as they have been in years past. And so you hear Brock talking about areas he wants to get better. And you've heard Shmuel talk about leadership, continuing to get better, pushing and striving to be better football players. And so we don't often talk about the known entities in spring practice. I think a lot of it is focused on guys who could be pushing for starting playing time, guys who, are either new to the program or transitioning from, guys, Ernest Green, for example, a guy who ended up redshirting last year. What does this spring look like for him as he goes out there, goes through spring practice and tries to win and ultimately a starting job at that left tackle position? Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about the quarterbacks and the way that battle shapes out over the next couple of weeks, and then obviously into the offseason and fall camp as well there. But, spring practice is just as vital for guys like Brock Bowers and Shmuel Munden as it is for guys like, say, a Lawson Lucky or a Raylan Wilson. Those young players that they hear so much about, getting that experience, getting that leg up, and what that ultimately means. There's value to that in terms of what Georgia gets from its veterans as well. You hear so much about Georgia wanting practices to be harder than games. I have no doubt that what Georgia is doing in spring practice right now is going to help prepare them for games when they get pushed and tested come this fall. And so, while yes, again, we're going to hear a lot and talk a lot about some of these younger names, some of these less known names. I think that's what the majority of spring practice is for. Don't overlook the importance that this has for veterans, for guys like Brock Bowers, for guys like Shmuel Munden. And so I think going forward, it'll be interesting to sort of see how things play out there and how these veterans improve and what they're able to get out of it. Like you look at a guy like Ladd McConkey last year, the steps he made from going from a role player to being Georgia's leading wide receiver. I don't think very many people would have expected that, but because of the role and the work that he put in during spring practice, that showed up come the fall. So spring practice for veterans there, and sort of flipping it to the other side of the coin, some freshmen so far that we've heard positive things about, or where things are in terms of their development. Obviously the tough news this week with Pierce Sperlin going down with a broken collarbone. He's going to miss the rest of spring. He should be good to go come fall practice there, but tough injury for a guy who already came in with some injury concerns, missed most of his senior season due to a shoulder injury there. So, the converse of that is that it's more reps for Lawson Lucky, and Lawson was a guy that came in during bowl practices, got some rave reviews from Kirby Smart and Todd Monken in terms of what he was able to bring. I would say he was already a little bit ahead of Pierce in terms of where he fit within this offense. And now you're going to see, I think, Lawson Lucky get a few more snaps and a few more reps, and ultimately might be Georgia's third tight end, sort of an H-back sort of role for Georgia this year. Obviously he doesn't have the same body type that Oscar Delp has, certainly much less Darnell Washington, and isn't quite the athlete that Brock Bowers is, but a guy that I think could possibly, goal line situations, short yardage, could possibly play some kind of role for this team. Josh Miller is obviously out for the rest of the spring on the offensive line, but we've heard good things about Monroe Freeling, sort of what he might ultimately be able to do. I don't think right now he's in a position to really factor into being a name to know at that left tackle position, but I think long-term, there is reason to be very excited about what Freeling can bring to this team. As far as the newcomers at the wide receiver position, I think Dominic Lovett is the guy that is, in my opinion, the most ahead right now and the closest to contributing this coming fall. I will file this away, though. Tyler Williams, if he can put it all together, he has the tools to be a very, very impressive wide receiver. Great speed, has every bit the size that you want from someone in that outside wide receiver position. I think this is a guy who, again, there's some rawness with him. He is not exactly the most refined prospect, but he is a guy that I think if he's able to get some time and really put things together, I think he could be a very impactful player for Georgia at that wide receiver position. And look, he could put it together quickly than some people anticipate. A.D. Mitchell was a guy that came in and played really well as a freshman, and I think had a similar body type, though I would note that Williams is bigger and stronger than Mitchell was, and faster as well. George Pickens had a very strong freshman season. So we've seen guys come in and pick things up relatively quickly. Dylan Bell, even last year, I thought had some nice moments. And so I think, what does Tyler Williams ultimately look like and what he's able to do? On the defensive side of the ball, you continue to hear really, really good things about two guys that ultimately aren't going to play much this year, in C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson. Wilson's the better athlete of the two. Not quite the Quay Walker type. I think he's closer to to Kobe Dean's body size, but a violent hitter, a guy that sees ball, hit ball, and is going to be, I think, a very promising player one day. And then I'll tip my cap to Jeff Santel on this. He has been pounding the table for CJ Allen. He was, I believe, the lowest ranked of the 3 inside linebacker signees that Georgia brought in. But from all accounts, this is a guy that just gets it, is just a football player, and has gotten a lot of strong reviews so far, including from Shmuel Munden, in terms of what he's bringing to the team. And ultimately, a guy that I think is going to play a very large role for Georgia going forward.
Yeah, for sure. Not necessarily just with CJ and Raylan, but I feel like they're all out there making plays, you know. I feel like that's what spring's for. You know, you're going to mess up, but really just go out there and just play loose, you know, just make plays, do what you can.
For those 2 freshmen at your position, how valuable do you feel like it is that they are here early and sort of what they can do in learning to get ready for the fall?
I feel like it's really valuable because with me as a freshman coming in, I felt like you kind of get a head start on the playbook going into the summer and going into fall camp. So you're not really going to be like as confused really, because like it's kind of like a practice fall camp really for a lot of the freshmen. So like whenever they get there and things really get rolling again, they're gonna kind of really know what's going on, and then like they're not gonna be as lost.
What do you remember about you going through that? I mean, was your head spinning for part of that?
Yeah, I was kind of nervous before spring practice my freshman year, just because I was I don't know, I didn't really know what to expect, but yeah, it's been a long time since then.
Yeah, so you hear Shmuel talking about the rigors of being a freshman and getting up to speed so quickly, and why these guys going through spring practice have the leg up that they do right now. At the outside linebacker position, I'll touch on here a little bit. Damon Wilson, I think, is the guy who, again, there are higher expectations for him to come in and play right away. And you certainly see that in what we've been able to see in here so far coming out of spring practice. He is, I think, the most developed coming into the program in terms of Gabe Harris, Sam Mpemba, and then Wilson in terms of what he's going to be able to bring. All those guys physically have the tools to play at an SEC level. This outside linebacker room is much bigger physically, I think, than it has been in years past. And then in the secondary, haven't heard a whole lot about Janelle Aguero just yet, and I think they're going to end up going with a more veteran option at that safety spot, whether it be Javon Bullard, whether it be David Daniel. Dan Jackson is a name that is going to factor into this come the fall. They've got options at Star and Tyke Smith and Smoke Bowie as well. AJ Harris is a guy who I think one day will be a starting cornerback for Georgia, but with Dalen Everett, Nyland Green, Julian Humphrey all ahead of him, and obviously Kamari Lassiter coming back, it's going to be a big ask, even for a guy as talented as Harris, to come in and play right away at that cornerback position. But by all accounts, he's a guy that certainly fits in that cornerback room in terms of what Fran Brown is looking for and what ultimately Georgia has gotten out of its cornerbacks in recent years. Darian Kendrick, Keely Ringo, Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell. I expect by the end of his college career, AJ Harris to be mentioned in the same breath as some of those guys there. And so with that, that's sort of the 3 main topics tonight in terms of what we're going to get into. Just open it up to some comments, questions, thoughts you guys might have, things you want to hear about, questions, things in general. 2 programming notes, or I guess 1 real programming note. Won't have a show next Sunday. I'm going to be on vacation, and then I'm probably not going to have a show on Easter Sunday, aka Master Sunday. Just a lot going on that day. I'll be traveling a little bit. And so not certain we're going to have a show on Easter Sunday. Definitely not going to have a show next Sunday as well. So, but worst case scenario, if we don't have those 2 shows, I will 100% be back for the Sunday after G-Day. So just a quick little note there. So let's see some comments, thoughts, questions you guys might have in terms of what is going on. Chase White, Connor, how is Julio doing? I'm assuming that's in regard to Julian Humphrey, who it sounds like he's making a little bit of a move here at that cornerback position, pushing alongside guys like Nyland Green and Dalen Everett. I still think Dalen is maybe first right now, but that competition is far from over. And I think, again, this speaks to the depth that they have in that cornerback room. They are so well stocked there. Nyland Green looks like an SEC corner. He looks like how a guy should look. He's an absolute stud on special teams. And, the fact that he's not outright starting, I think speaks to what you have in Kamari Lassiter and what you have in guys like Dalen Everett and Julian Humphrey. I think a lot of people coming into spring, Humphrey was maybe a little bit of an afterthought, just given there was so much around Everett, given how he started out last year, made some big strides over the course of the year, seemed to be in pole position. But I think Julian Humphrey is a guy that is going to be a name to know at that cornerback position, maybe even sooner rather than later. Let's see. A good question there, Chase. Let's see. Yeah, Jack Moreno. Again, Glenn Schumann, and man, I hope I talked to Schmal about Glenn and why he's such a coveted name and why he's one of the best defensive coaches in all of football. This is a guy who you bring back your two starters. You bring back a guy in Jalen Walker who's got to go play outside linebacker to get reps. Xavier Sori is a 5-star prospect that can't get on the field. Trezman Marshall is a guy that was really valued in this Georgia program, but he can't get on the field and ends up transferring to Alabama for playing time. You go out, you bring in Troy Bowles, Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen, and Troy's going to join the program this offseason in the summer. You bring in all of that into that room. I mean, there's no maybe position group in all of college football that has as much raw talent as that inside linebacker room. And Georgia's going to rotate. Ryan Davis is going to play a role. I think there's going to look for someone who can be that fourth inside linebacker and maybe go with a rotation of 4, maybe cut that down to 3 over the course of the season. But you could make an argument their second rotation of 3 guys is just as talented as some in the SEC that you're going to see this year. So I think it's a big plus to have that kind of talent in the inside linebacker room, especially with just how Georgia has always used its inside linebackers, no matter who has been the defensive coordinator. Mel Tucker, Dan Lanning, Glenn Schumann, Will Muschamp have the co-titles currently, but Georgia's always gotten strong inside linebacker play, and I think that speaks to why that room is as talented and good as it is right now. Brian Friedman asking about Ra Thomas. I'm not as quite as high on Ra as some other people were in terms of him coming into the program. He doesn't, in my opinion, stand out physically the way maybe some people anticipated him doing so. And quite frankly, look, we've made it clear here for a while. I really like what Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint's going to bring to this team this year. I think there's maybe some overlap in terms of skill set there with him and Ra. And Marcus is a guy who does everything right, is a leader for this program, is a guy who I think the coaches trust and know what they're going to get out of him. And while maybe some people have penciled Ra in as a starter, I wouldn't expect that at this point in time. And I think Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint should be getting some of the buzz that Ra has gotten this offseason. Let's see. Comments, thoughts. Yeah, Antonio, this is a fair point in terms of weaknesses with this team. Again, they're going to start scrimmaging next week. There's still a ton we don't know about some of those areas of concern. I'd maybe be a little surprised if Georgia does go out and try and add in the transfer portal after spring practice. It'd have to be for a guy that they just really feel it would help this program, not just this season, but I think multiple years going forward. Their weaknesses, quote unquote, they're not as stark as some others. Like, you have questions about what the quarterback is going to look like, just given that none of those guys have ever started and played big time games before. But, there's not going to be a quarterback available, I think, that would help us or lessen some of the needs there or concern there. You probably maybe love to have another body at the tight end position, but he'd just be a body. I think they really like what they have in Brock Bowers. They obviously love what they have in Brock Bowers, and I think Oscar Delp is a guy that's going to play significant football for Georgia this season. And you look at even corner and safety, the areas of concern on the defensive side of the ball, they feel really good with what they have at those two spots, letting some of those young guys battle it out. Obviously outside linebacker right now, it's a young position, but I feel they feel very comfortable with what they have in Chaz Chambliss, knowing what they're going to get out of him on a down-by-down basis, and then betting on the upside with guys like Marvin Jones and Jalen Walker. Darius Smith, we'll see what we continue to see out of him. Damon Wilson. You don't sign the type of prospects they sign at that outside linebacker room and then go bring in players from the transfer portal there. So let's see. Scrolling down. Thoughts, questions. Let's see. Rhett Romack. I don't think Aguero this fall is a starting safety. I don't believe he makes the sort of jump and leap that Malachi Starks did last season. I think Georgia's in a better spot at that safety position right now than maybe they were a season ago. Which I definitely think allowed Starks to step in and play the role that he did, because I think if Georgia really wants to, they can move Javon Bullard into that starting safety spot, and they can play either Tyke Smith or Smoke Bowie at that star position, in addition to having guys like David Daniel and Dan Jackson there. And so I think that's going to make it a tough uphill battle. We have names we haven't even mentioned: Ja'Cory Thomas, Marcus Washington Jr., guys at those positions that I think are going to make it tough on Aguero seeing the field right away at Georgia. Good question, though. Let's see. Yeah, and Wade Wolfer, in talking about the cornerback position, Kamari hasn't gotten the same level of pub or press that, say, Akili Ringo did last year, or even when I think Darian Kendrick came in from Clemson. In talking about him, Kamari, not the most vocal of guys, wasn't a superstar recruit, but last year came in, played real solid defense. Georgia knows what they have in him. He doesn't there's no superstar trait with Kamari. He's not, he's not going to run a 4.3 at the combine. He is not 6'2", but he does everything well. And he is sort of a guy who the sum of the parts is greater. So to make a poor analogy there, but he is a guy who he does everything good, if not nothing great. And because of that, Georgia feels very good about what they have in their cornerback there. And there's a reason why he is so comfortably, put in pen as a starter for Georgia. And ultimately, I think going to be a guy that I think by the end of this season could certainly be an all-SEC player for this Georgia team. I think they believe in him that much. Jack Moreno, number 8. Let me see. They did just update the rosters. Let me see if I can quickly do this in terms of who has that number. Obviously, Dominic Blaylock and MJ Sherman had it last year. Janelle Aguero has number 8 for this year, but no offensive player with that number at this point in time. David Riddle, I guess now is certainly a fair time to talk about quarterbacks. We've gone 30 minutes. Carson Beck still seems a little bit ahead in terms of where things are. But again, this is going to be a thing that goes into the spring. It goes through spring practice, goes into the fall. I've said before, I don't believe that Brock Vandagriff is going to transfer. I think he sees the value in sticking it out and is going to be a player for this team and could possibly very certainly play a role and could end up even starting, whether he wins the job or in the event Carson Beck gets injured. Stetson Bennett getting all 15 games last season and starting every game due to good health was a little bit of an anomaly, given what we've seen from Georgia and really just across SEC football in recent years there. So I'll be really interested in seeing what those guys do in the spring. It does sound like, Brock has made, I think, the necessary leaps that you'd want to see from him, given, we didn't hear a whole lot about him last year. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how he continues to play. And obviously I think there are going to be a lot of eyes on him and Carson Beck as well on G-Day there. I will say, I don't think they're necessarily – you're going to see a ton from Gunnar Stockton in G-Day, and that's in part because they don't believe G-Day is tailored to his game the best at this point in time. He's a guy who I think more so than Brock and certainly more so than Carson is going to use his legs, and that would be a part of how Georgia would use him, and they just don't do that in spring games. Demon Smith, I don't think Georgia's worried about losing corners to the portal at this point. They might have a few guys leave the transfer portal after spring, but not very many. And again, you bring back Kamari, and Kirby has said as much before in the past. Corners a position where you just naturally see a lot of attrition to the transfer portal. They're going to bring in Chris Peel this offseason. They have Smoke Bowie, who was practicing at the cornerback position, and they're going to move around and play him wherever they ultimately need to. We touched on Julian Humphrey. A.J. Harris has just come into the program. I don't think you're going to see anyone transfer out. We already saw Jaheim Singletary from the 2022 class transfer out, and so I think that'll be the extent of it at the cornerback position this year. Alan Verbanich, yeah, I probably agree with you here, Alan. I think, if you want to see the best version of this defense this year, I'd be really interested in seeing what Javon Bullard looks like as your starting safety and what he might be able to bring and give to the team. Alan Hampton, yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier in talking about the tight ends. I think Lawson Lucky is a guy that's going to play a very big role for Georgia, even as well as they've recruited tight end, as well as they continue to recruit tight end. Lawson Lucky is just a football player. Let's see. We'll maybe do one or two more questions here before calling it an evening. Obviously, new session tonight. NCAA Final Four is set. Miami will play UConn. San Diego State will play Florida Atlantic. I don't think anybody would have had that. And in watching it, Connecticut's winning this whole thing. Like, that team is just, every single game has more or less been the same, with maybe the exception of the Arkansas game, where they play, tight, but they have a lead going into halftime, and then they just hit warp speed in the second half and just annihilate a team off the floor. They did it to St. Mary's. They did it to Iona, Gonzaga. Arkansas, obviously the biggest high major team they had played, though obviously I think Gonzaga's credentials are well established. Arkansas, they just whooped them from the start. And I think Connecticut is going to be the team that wins it all this year. Let's see. On the men's side, anyway, I think South Carolina is going to win on the women's side as well. Let's see. Jamie Lindsay, overall, this might be a good point to leave for the night. Overall, how good is the defense going to be this season? I don't know if they've got the individual star power to match what you saw in 2021. I think you'd need to see some big leaps from guys like Michael Williams, Kamari Lassiter, Malachi Starks, Bear Alexander. And I think all those guys have the capability of possibly doing that, but you're going to need all of them to do it. And that's just not how growth works. And so I think, the fact that in that 2021 defense, a lot of those guys were juniors. I think in that 2022 defense, or 2023 defense rather, most of those guys are sophomores. Obviously Smile Monday and Jamon Dumas-Johnson, those guys are in their third year in the program. And they have a lot of veterans on the defensive line. Azir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson are both in their fourth years in the program. So I don't know if it's going to quite be 2021 level defense good, but a step down from that, not a very far step. It's maybe the difference from having a clear number one overall defense to being number two, number three, number four. In that vein, I think this defense is going to be very good. Obviously, I think, what do you see and what are the developments of that outside linebacker position, I think are the one big question you have there. But with what we've seen from Georgia, from a statistical standpoint, they've never gotten a ton out of that outside linebacker room. And, its best pass rushing numbers have almost always come when they have active inside linebackers. I think Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Smell London can obviously do that. And so I think going forward, will this defense be as good as 2021? If I had to guess right now, I'd probably lean no, despite playing an easier schedule ultimately. I do think, though, this defense is going to be exceptional once again in 2023 and could certainly be one of, if not the best, in all of college football. So that's a good, I think, last question to leave it on for us here tonight. We've gone about 37 minutes, plenty of time for, especially during spring practice. So wrapping things up here, they've completed 6 of 15 practices so far. They're going to have their first real big scrimmage this coming weekend. We'll get to hear from Kirby Smart on Saturday there. You obviously got Brandon Adams Monday through Friday. You've got Jeff Sintel on Wednesdays. You've got Mike Griffith tomorrow night with On the Beat. So plenty of other Georgia football coverage and content coming up throughout the course of this week. 2 quick notes. Won't be here next Sunday, obviously. I'm taking some vacation time. And then the Sunday after, we are TBD. Probably not going to do a show on Easter Sunday, a.k.a. Master Sunday. But we'll let you guys know there. And obviously keep you updated. Obviously continue to check DawgNation.com for any of the latest updates and things like that. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Won't be back next Sunday, but won't be gone for much long. So thanks for tuning in. My name is Connor Riley. This has been another episode of Connor in Coverage.